Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming today for this ICES seminar on Japan-India maritime collaboration in the Indian Ocean region, opportunities and challenges. Let me just quickly introduce the speaker. Dr. Rupert Vohra is currently Assistant Professor of International Relations at the School of Liberal Studies, Pandit Deendayal Petroleum University in Gujarat. And he has been a visiting fellow of the Center for International Studies in Cambridge and a visiting research fellow at the Japan Institute of International Affairs in Japan. Dr. Vohra holds a doctorate from the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, India. Today he will be talking about Japan-India maritime collaboration in the Indian Ocean region. So I don't want to take much time. Just pass the floor to Dr. Vohra. We'll speak for about roughly 30 minutes and then we've got 30 minutes for question and answer. Rupert?
A very warm good afternoon to you, and many thanks to Dr. Sinderpal Singh for helping me for arranging everything with regards to the lecture. I would also like to thank ISAS, Professor Robin Jeffrey, who happened to be my mentor while I was on an earlier trip to Australia. My sincere thanks to the Japan Institute of International Affairs also, and my home institute, of course. So today I'll be speaking about Japan-India maritime collaboration in the Indian Ocean region. Now this is one of the newer aspects of cooperation or collaboration between Japan and India. Although there has been much happening between the two countries. The Prime Minister of India, Dr. Singh, is scheduled to go to Japan later this month, and there are many things happening between the two countries. But even within the entire ambit of Japan-India relations, maritime cooperation is one of the relatively newer areas, and this is where I would like to touch on. So to begin with, so Japan and India have historical ties dating back to the times when Buddhism made its inroads to Japan from its country of birth, of course, India. And there was much happening between the two countries with the poet Rabindranath Tagore, and there were many Indian scholars who were associated with Japan, especially poet Rabindranath Tagore. And as we all know, in the Indian justice, Radha Vinod Pal was the only justice was the only dissenting voice on the War Crimes Tribunal, which is also known as the Tokyo Trials, after the end of the Second World War. So much so that the Japanese still revere Justice Radha Vinod Pal. And the Indian delegation at the Far Eastern Commission was sympathetic to Japanese concerns about rebuilding their nation and refused to ask for reparations at the 1952 San Francisco Conference. So this is about the historical background to the ties. This is a map of the area involved. Now I'm going to talk about the collaboration between the two in the maritime arena. So this is just a picture of one of the exercises between the coast guards of the two countries. As you can see, there's the vessel of the Japanese Coast Guard in the background, and then there is an Indian Coast Guard helicopter in the forefront. So this is what is known as exercise Sahyog Kaiji. Now earlier,
where was this held?
This is off the coast of in the Indian Ocean. Yeah. This is off the coast of India, but of course it's sometimes off the coast of Japan and sometimes off the coast of India. But this is just the exercises between the coast guards. Now what has changed now is, for the first time last year in June 2012, the Indian and the Japanese navies have started joint exercises. Till last year, in June last year, there were only exercises between the coast guards of the two nations, not between the navies of the two nations. But from last year, they have started joint exercises between the two countries. The importance of maritime power projection. We all know the renowned naval strategist Alfred Thayer Mahan. He, in his famous book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, talks about the Indian Ocean as a great highway, a wide common. So the word commons is very much in use nowadays. And why is India paying increasing attention to the maritime domain? Now, As we have all seen, there was a recent spat with China across the on the line of actual control. So India's options on land are limited. In the west with Pakistan, the fraught relations with Pakistan, India doesn't have much space to move to the west. Neither to the north, because we have seen the border with China is a disputed one, and it is the only land border, China's only land border that remains unsettled. China has settled its land border disputes with all the other countries. I'm saying only the land borders. China has settled its land border disputes with all the neighboring countries, save for India. So India is looking at the naval rim, especially the Indian Ocean region, in order to increase its strategic leverage in the region. And this is seen in the increasing weightage that it is giving to bodies like the IOR-ARC, the Indian Ocean Rim Association for Regional Cooperation, where it is an important member along with the likes of South Africa and Australia. So India is giving increasing attention to the maritime domain, because I argue that along India's land boundaries, there are hardly any prospects for it to increase its force projection capabilities. Now, why is maritime cooperation between the two countries, Japan and India, important? India and Japan are poor in indigenous energy resources and are dependent on oil imports mainly from the Middle East. Japan more so than India. India still has some indigenous natural resources, but Japan is very poor in natural resources. Therefore, unrestricted freedom of navigation through this region, the Indian Ocean region, is critical for the health of their economies, both the Indian economies and the Indian and the Japanese economies. And to also prevent the Indian Ocean region from being dominated by any single naval power. This has never happened in the past, but with the increase of China's force projection capabilities, in order to ensure that there is no country which emerges as the dominant naval power in the region, it is important for Japan and India to cooperate. And there is also the need to cooperate against non-traditional security threats like natural disasters and piracy. As I give the seminar today, there is a cyclone that has made landfall in along the Bangladesh-Myanmar border. So you see the non-traditional security threats like natural disasters and piracy is an important aspect. We must know that the Indian Ocean reaches all the way to the eastern coast of Africa. And even the Straits of Malacca is not free from piracy either. So there are also natural threats like non-traditional security threats like natural disasters and piracy that need to be tackled. And just to continue from where I have left, India also now has commercial interests in the region with some major investments by the oil and gas ONGC, the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, which is a state oil major. It has investments off the coast of Vietnam. It has of course withdrawn from some of the blocks later because it could not find oil, but still it has significant investment off the coast of Vietnam. And the Indian navies and the Indian and the Japanese navies, they actually complement each other. The Indian Navy has a formidable presence in the region between the Straits and the Hormuz and the Straits of Malacca. And the Indian Navy is one of the most active navies on the anti-piracy front. And this is very important for Japan because a large percentage of Japanese shipping and Japanese-owned shipping passes through the Indian Ocean region. And the Fukushima disaster, as we all know, in March 2011, it has reduced the production of nuclear power in Japan, and hence its oil and gas imports have further increased. And of course, we have to understand that the domestic climate in Japan is very much against the continuation of the production of nuclear energy. Although the new government, the LDP government led by Shinzo Abe, has said that they would try to revive nuclear power, but overall public perception is very high against the continuation of the production of nuclear energy. So in Japan, in domestic politics would not allow, there will be lesser and lesser reliance on nuclear energy, and so therefore Japan would have to rely on other forms of energy which it doesn't have at present and needs to import from various parts of the world, especially the Middle East. Now, coming back to the cooperation in the non-traditional security front, and Japan and India were part of the original core group of nations along with Australia and the United States, which provided relief in 2004 after the Boxing Day tsunami of December 26, 2004. So the Japanese and the Indian navies along with the navies of Australia and the United States they have collaborated in this area before on the non-traditional security front. And there have been regular exercises within the navies. But mind you, these are only multilateral exercises. Malabar is a multilateral exercise. So in 2007 and 2009, Japan, India, the United States, and some of the Southeast Asian countries, the navies of some of the Southeast Asian countries, they collaborated in the Malabar series of exercises. But in 2011, Japan opted out because, of course, the Fukushima disaster. And as I've shown the picture in the beginning, the Indian and the Japanese Coast Guards, they have been holding annual exercises for a long time now. I think it began in the year 2000. Another important initiative that Japan and India are part of is the Regional Cooperation Agreement on combating piracy and armed robbery against ships in Asia, also known as the RECAP. So Japan and India are both members of this agreement, and this is another area of cooperation between the two countries in the maritime arena. Now, as I have already said, both the countries have conducted the first joint naval exercises off the coast of Japan in June last year. Especially for Japan, it was a major leap of faith because they were very reluctant in having regular naval exercises with India. They managed to do multilateral exercises involving the United States and some of the Southeast Asian navies, but it was very reluctant to go alone with India. But this has changed. This changed last year, and early this year, Japan and India have begun their first ever maritime affairs dialogue. So now there is a dedicated dialogue in place in which there are high-level officials from India's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Japanese MOFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of their country. They have established a maritime dialogue. The first meeting was held in January this year. So they have a dedicated maritime dialogue. So many things, as I've said, are changing on the maritime front between Japan and India. And meanwhile, the trilateral dialogue has also started between the United States, Japan, and India. The first of which was held in Washington, D.C. in December 2011. So now I think the fourth of the series has happened. After that it was Tokyo, then New Delhi, and then back in Washington, D.C. again. I think the fourth of them has just got over. So there are many ways in which the cooperation is increasing on the maritime front. Now, I think the beginning of the Japan-India cooperation in the maritime arena, it happened way back in November 1999, when the Indian Coast Guard and Navy, they successfully rescued a Japanese-owned oil tanker named MV Alondra Rainbow, hijacked by pirates. So this was when Japan and the Japanese government realized that India would be an important partner for Japan in the Indian Ocean region, especially to protect against incidents of piracy. So this thing I would call was a game changer as far as the maritime relations between India and Japan were concerned. Of course, there were other issues also. And the Indian Navy started regular patrolling anti-piracy, dedicated anti-piracy patrols in the Gulf of Aden from 23 October to 2008. And it was around the same time when the pirates attacked the Takayama, 150,000-ton oil tanker, which was however rescued by the Japanese Navy. But this was the same time when Japan was reeling under the onslaught of piracy attacks, and the Indian Navy came to its rescue on many occasions, especially in November 1999. And we have to remember that since 2009, the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force has deployed 2 destroyers and 2 P-3C aircraft off the coast of Djibouti. Japan itself has been very active in the fight against piracy. And mind you, now India has also will shortly be deploying the P-3C aircraft in the naval version of the P-3C aircraft. So India has also acquired the P-3C from the United States, and India will also be deploying those. And in July 2011, something remarkable happened when Japan opened its first military base after the Second World War in Djibouti to combat piracy off the coast of the Horn of Africa. So this is Japan's first actual military deployment after the Second World War off the coast of Djibouti, of course, and this is to combat piracy. So as I said, piracy is one of the important non-traditional security threats, are also an important area of cooperation between the two countries. Now, other areas of collaboration. As we all know, both the countries have been involved in the fight against maritime terrorism. If we see the incidents of the attack on the USS Cole that was in off the coast of Aden in Yemen in 2000, it brought home to the world the dangers of maritime terrorism. In India, in 2008, in the November 2008 attacks in Mumbai, the attackers came by sea. So maritime terrorism is another area that the two countries need to be worried about. And also to tackle issues like maritime pollution and environmental disasters like oil spills. Now, of course, the China factor, of course, we cannot discount the China factor in the Japan-India maritime collaboration. Of course, this is not the only factor, this is just one of the factors in the relationship. China has already inducted its first aircraft carrier, the Liaoning, and is rapidly modernizing its navy. There are some reports which say that China is also ready to commission the second aircraft carrier. But for a long time, India and Thailand were the only two countries which were operating carriers in the region, but now China has its own carrier. And of course, we know about this fight between Japan and China near the Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands in September 2010. Which created a major diplomatic issue between the two countries. And in the aftermath of that incident in September 2010, China unofficially declared a ban on the rare earth exports to Japan. So you see, it was actually a fight between which was actually the Chinese fishermen had intruded into Japanese waters, but then the Chinese government took it as an opportunity to pull the plug on rare earth exports to Japan, which became a big issue because the Japanese elected these rare earth materials. They find application in high-end electronic items and also in sensors, in missile guidance systems, in avionics, and all these high-end technology items. So the Japanese companies depended to a huge extent on the Chinese rare earth exports, and China now at present is the world's biggest producer of rare earths. And during this crisis, unofficially, not on the official level, unofficially China pulled the plug with regards to the rare earth exports. And it's interesting to note that when the then Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihiko Noda visited India for the annual bilateral summit, India and Japan have now signed an agreement for the joint production and export of rare earth materials. India is one of the major exporters of rare earth materials, not to the extent of China, but we have significant amounts of rare earths, and India and Japan are now producing and exporting rare earth materials. And by the way, Japan has also signed similar agreements with Malaysia. Back in 2007, in May 2007, the Quadrilateral Initiative was set up involving Japan, India, Australia, and the United States, though it fizzled out later. The Quadrilateral Initiative was a loose arrangement between these four countries, Japan, India, Australia, and the United States, but it did not take off because countries, especially Australia and even India, were not too keen to be seen as part of the Quadrilateral Initiative, which was ostensibly pitted against China. But there was such an initiative which had taken off, but as I say later, it fizzled out later. Now, of course, India has lots of worries with regards to China's maritime power projection capabilities. The so-called Chinese string of pearls strategy, it seeks to enclose India by building a series of strategic ports and refueling facilities, not all of which, these are not all of which being built by Chinese companies, but they are being run or managed by Chinese companies also. And these include Gwadar in Pakistan. I have a map later which I'll show you. Then Sri Lanka, Hambantota. Let me go back to the, yeah. So if you see, China has built a series of naval facilities, starting off with I just wanted to use the pointer.
Go forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Go back to the. Just go back to this. previous, yeah, the previous, and you need to connect. Yeah. So this is the Gwadar port that China has helped construct in Pakistan. Then this is Hambantota in Sri Lanka. Then this facility is of course Chittagong. This is Chittagong in Bangladesh, and this is Chittagong should have been here. But this is Kyakpo in Burma. This is Kyakpo in Burma, from which they are building a pipeline that will connect to Kunming in southern China. So these are all the facilities that China has either built or helped construct all around India in the Indian Ocean region. So this is what some analysts have said is the string of pearls theory. And India is definitely worried by these Chinese moves in the in the Indian Ocean region. And the operation of Gwadar port has recently been given to a Chinese company. Earlier there was I think a Singaporean company that was running the affairs of the Gwadar port, but now it has been taken over by a Chinese company. Now let us see the change in Japan's strategy. In December 2010, Japan announced a new defense policy which warned of China's rapidly modernizing military, especially its growing naval capabilities. So this was the first time the Japanese government officially put it on paper that it was taking note of China's increasing naval modernization. And if you see, one of the most interesting guidelines that was called for in the white paper was that it calls for increasing the number of Japan submarines to 22 from the current 16, while reducing the number of tanks by a third to around 400. So this means that Japan fears a naval threat from China rather than a land threat from any other country. So this was a clear-cut indication that Japan's priorities are changing, and it is reaching out to countries like India, Australia, and Vietnam. If you see for initial visits made by the new Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, initially he reached out to Vietnam, Thailand, and the Southeast Asian countries, and of course, in some of the major policy speeches that he has given after being elected as the Prime Minister, he has repeatedly referred to the importance of these countries for Japan. Now let us look at some of the problem areas in the relationship. Now, one of the main important lacunas in the relationship is the lack of a maritime cooperation treaty between the two countries, which means that the cooperation between the two countries happens on a case-by-case basis, and there is no overall overarching treaty structure which can be called into for things like this. And then there is a divergence on many issues like all imports from Iran. Now, the Western countries have been putting up, and the European Union also, the EU countries also have been putting pressure on India to reduce its oil imports from Iran. But there is disagreement between Japan and India on this front, whereas Japan has agreed to reduce oil imports. India has very reluctantly cut down oil imports from Iran, but that too not by a significant margin. It has cut down, but it has not stopped. So there are different divergences on issues like oil imports from Iran, and the major problem is Japan's arms exports laws. So Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution forbids the export of arms or arms manufacturing technology to other countries. So there is a domestic debate also on the Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, which forbids the transfer of arms or the arms manufacturing technology. So India cannot do anything with regards to these laws which are enshrined in the Japanese Constitution. But then this is a major problem area in the maritime cooperation between the two countries. And of course, the frequent change of governments and prime ministers in Japan has been a problem because on the one hand, the Prime Minister Singh has been meeting, I think, the Japanese prime ministers right from Shinzo Abe in 2006. And 2005 also, I think, Nishiro Koizumi. But there have been frequent change of prime ministers in Japan. So, and by the way, there's an annual summit at the level of the prime minister between Japan and India. So relations also depend on the personal rapport between the two leaders. And so by the time the Indian Prime Minister builds a rapport with one Japanese Prime Minister, the next one would have already come. So this has also been hampering not only the maritime relations between the two countries, but then there are many, this is one of the factors. Then the US factor in the Japan-India maritime ties. One of the factors, of course, in the improving ties between the two countries is the fact that India's ties with the US have improved considerably since the Cold War days. And Japan and India now also have some common equipment, military equipment in their arsenals. This is because many American firms have entered the lucrative Indian defense market, and India has bought transport aircraft like the C-130J and the Harpoon missiles and maritime surveillance aircraft like the P-3C Orion, which Japan also employs. So now there is a convergence with regards to military hardware also, because earlier most of India's weapons were of Russian origin, but now India buys weapons from all across the world, from Russia, from Israel, from the United States, from France, and also from other countries, whether it be Britain, and now there have been some major deals signed with the European conglomerates also. And by the way, India has emerged as the largest arms importer in the world. So this is Article 9. Japan manufactures many naval weaponry which India would be interested in. But of course, as I have put it earlier, Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution prevents Japan from exporting such technology to third countries. Now, because they are operating common military hardware, this could allow for interoperability between the navies of the three countries, which is United States, India and Japan. And they have in the past also conducted joint naval exercises, which are the Malabar series of exercises. And of course, the US pivot towards the Asia-Pacific will make maritime ties between Japan and India stronger. There is no doubt in this, because as President Obama has outlined in his second term, the importance on the US pivot will continue, and therefore it means that the maritime ties between Japan and India will grow stronger, because both the countries are quite close to the United States. And when this time the Prime Minister Singh visits Japan, the second part of his the second leg of his visit will be in Thailand. And this also actually, the cooperation between India and Japan gels well with India's Look-East policy. The Look-East policy, as all of you would know, is a policy to reinvigorate India's ties with the countries of Southeast Asia and East Asia, because historically we had close ties with these countries, but many things happened during the Cold War which increased the gulf between India and these countries. So it actually works into India's Look-East policy. Then some recommendations from my part. The two countries could have joint patrolling activities in the Indian Ocean region to begin with. Something we have already done with countries like Thailand and with countries like Indonesia. By the way, in Indo-Corpat means, the second point, in Indo-Corpat means India-Indonesia coordinated patrols. So maybe something similar could be also started with Japan. There should be more joint exercises between India, Japan and countries like Malaysia, Singapore and Indonesia, with whom India already has close naval ties. India has a lot of experience in conducting exercises with the Southeast Asian navies. We of course have the SIMBIX exercises with Singapore, in Indo-Corpat with Indonesia, besides the multilateral Milan series of exercises. The Milan series of exercises, which have been held biennially, that is every 2 years since 1991, are designed to foster closer cooperation and address maritime security issues among the navies of India and the Southeast Asian countries, besides countries like Australia and New Zealand. And another important fact to remember is that India and Japan are also part of the East Asia Summit now. In fact, Japan was one of the countries which helped India to get into the East Asia Summit, because China was not too happy with getting India into the East Asia Summit. So India also has to thank Japan for its entry into the forums like the East Asia Summit. They could undertake joint production of maritime equipment like those involved in search and rescue operations. If not for offensive operations, search and rescue operations, they could jointly manufacture some weapons. As India is trying to move from a buyer's navy to a builder's navy. if you have followed the news in the recent days, there has been many corruption scandals have been exposed in India involving purchase of foreign weaponry. So there is an increasing focus within the Indian government also that we should move from a buyer's navy to a builder's navy, and this is one of the areas where Japan and India could collaborate, because India wants to move to being a builder's navy. Then apart from these areas, there are also prospects for cooperation in shipbuilding, dry dock expansion, hydrographic surveys, etc. India, mind you, has a long coastline, and there are many other ways in which Japanese companies can take advantage of India's long coastline and engage in things like shipbuilding, dry dock expansion, and these surveys, and building of ports. Because as we see the Indian economy, as in the Indian economy grows, it will need more and better ports. So Japanese companies could also come in and they can take advantage of India's increasing, India's booming economy. And in the years to come, as India's economy grows and its trade with other countries increases, it will need more ports. And as I put it at the end, of course the rider is there. It will help if Japan could loosen its arms exports laws. So this is one of the areas that will have to be talked upon during the annual summit between Prime Minister Singh and the present incumbent, Mr. Shinzo Abe. So I argue therefore that there should be a maritime cooperation treaty which will encompass anti-piracy operations, refueling, disaster relief, anti-terrorism efforts, just like the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement or CEPA. So instead of doing things on an ad hoc basis, like this thing here, that thing there should be a maritime cooperation treaty. I think the time has now come to think on the lines of a maritime cooperation treaty. And I think the beginning of a maritime dialogue between the two countries is the first step in this direction, which is a very right step. Japan can help India upgrade its coastal security, for example, learning from the Mumbai experience. India has a long coastline and it is impossible for India to police its entire coastline. So therefore the element of technology comes in this area. And Japan, as we all know, has good technical expertise, and therefore it could share its technical expertise with India and help us police the long coastline. And there are some recent developments I think in last year, 2 Indian fishermen were killed by Italian Marines who were actually deployed on an Italian oil tanker. And Japan, and this became a huge issue between the two countries. Some Italian Marines were they were arrested and then they were sent back home, and then they refused to return. Finally, they returned. So there have been issues like this. So in order for Japan and India not to have such things, I think it's better to work out a treaty beforehand. And they can also jointly go for seabed exploration and provide security to offshore assets. India has offshore assets off the coast of India. And they could also jointly provide security to such assets and also go for seabed exploration. So I think there have been, I have outlined some of my recommendations, some of the problem areas, but it will take, this is one, as I have laid out at the beginning, this is one of the newer areas of cooperation between Japan and India. And of course it will take time before we see some concrete steps happening in this area. But what is certain is that both the countries are aware that there is a need to increase the cooperation in the maritime arena. And I think in the days and in months to come, we will see many more things happening in the maritime realm. Because historically, this is how the two countries connected with each other. Now, of course, with the convergence of interests in the Indian Ocean region and with India's increasing power projection capabilities, this will emerge in the future as one of the major areas of cooperation between the two countries. So I end with this, and thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you, Deepak. I think as you said at the start, this is a new area of research. A lot of times we hear people speaking on this topic without the kind of research that you have obviously done. I think this is a work in progress, right? It's a joint project with someone in Japan.
With the Japanese.
Yeah. So I thought I learned quite a bit today just sitting here. So thank you for that. I'll open the floor to questions. Okay, switch on the lights. Some people.
Dr. Chaudhary, maybe the first question.
No, I'm not doing the first question, but very broadly speaking, I mean, very good presentation, etc. But a thing like this, I'm sure you've gone into cost analysis, etc., how it enhances capabilities, the kind of political implications of the cooperation. And it's not enough to say they should cooperate. Okay, everybody knows they should cooperate, but you know, how does the cooperation help in their defense capabilities? What would be the reaction of other local players like China, etc., to this cooperation? Some of these are factually may not be correct. I mean, about the string of pearls, as you know, there are debates as to whether these Sitwe and Chiklon and all that sort of thing are taking place. The other thing is procurements, the Japanese procurements. You mentioned submarines, but you didn't mention ships, for instance. I mean, that's a very major aspect of naval build-up is ships. What kind of submarines are these? I mean, are these Arihant type? I mean, are these what's it called, nuclear submarines? So, what is the role of the other navies in the area? If Japan cooperates with India, does it have implications, ramifications for North Korea, for instance? I mean, what is this? So, all these, I mean, what I mean is, okay, this is a straightforward thing of certain recommendations of a very general nature. But I would like it to be a little sharper than perhaps it is. Perhaps it's not the way it has been presented. But it has to be sharper than just say that these two countries are there on two sides of the Indian Ocean and they need to cooperate. And we should cooperate with Malaysia, they should cooperate with Singapore. But why? I mean, you know, to what end?
So do you want to stick one or two more?
Yeah.
Just
clarification. You have during your presentation interchangeably used the word Japanese Coast Guard cooperation and then Navy. As I understand that under the Japanese Constitution, the Navy cannot, I think, do exercises outside Straits of Malacca. So that's why only Coast Guards can be used by Japan in outside Straits of Malacca, correct?
Yeah, the last exercises were held off the coast of Japan.
On the coast. That's a Navy.
That's the Navy, yeah.
But outside Straits of Malacca is Coast Guards.
Yes.
The other thing that perhaps I follow up, I understand that in the South China Sea, there's a cooperation between Japan and India to protect the shipping of oil, because oil production has begun from India shores in Russian Far East. Is this cooperation a civilian type or naval, maritime, or outward? And would this be extended towards the Indian Ocean?
Sorry, Surya.
Have you made any study of the Chinese non-verbal, against the Quad, the Quadrilateral, Australia, India, Japan, and the US? And if so, what are the findings that you can
I think you can take the three and then we can go to the next round. We come to the next round, we take 3 questions.
Yeah, to answer the first question and comment. Yes, of course, I have left out the ships. I mentioned about the submarines. But what I wanted to make present here today is the fact that, you see, this is a very fledgling area of cooperation between the two countries. But what is important is that the two countries are aware of the importance of cooperation in the maritime arena. And this is reflected in the first maritime dialogue between the two countries, which has never happened in the past. So there are two things which have happened recently. First of all is the first joint naval exercise between the two countries, then the maritime affairs dialogue, and also the start of a trilateral dialogue between the United States, India, and Japan. So all of these point to the fact that there is a growing realization in both the countries that cooperation in this arena would benefit both Japan and India. In Japan more so because its dependence on oil imports from the Middle East, it's only going to increase. In the face of a drawdown of nuclear power in Japan, it's very important for Japan to ensure the stability of its oil supplies. And what if the Iran imbroglio, there's further escalation in Iran? In that case, Japan would have even bigger problems. So it is very important, at least for Japan, to ensure that the sea lanes of communication in the Indian Ocean region are kept open, and India is the only, being the dominant naval force in this area, and being friendly towards Japan would tremendously help Japanese naval interests, and of course the interests of the Japanese economy. And of course, one of the key issues in Japanese domestic politics is the fact that the LDP wants to revive Japan's ailing economy, and it has been successfully implemented. Today, there were reports were released that Japan has, for the first time, has recorded an increase in its GDP. To answer the second question, my ambassador, yes, of course, Indian oil companies are at work in the Russian Far East. But Japan is not involved in providing security to the oil imports from the Russian Far East, because anyway, Japan and Russia themselves have bilateral issues. So this cannot be seen as a kind of a template for the Japan-India cooperation in the Indian Ocean region. But of course, there are other areas, for example, the cooperation between the two countries on the anti-piracy front, with Japan opening a military base off the coast of Djibouti. So this could be kind of a template for the emerging cooperation in the maritime area. Then regarding Dr. Surya Narayan's question, yes, of course, I think China had, of course, issued no drawbacks to all the countries involved, and I think it was Australia under the then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, which I think was to say, after joining the Quadrilateral Initiative, was the first one, I think, to opt out. And I do not know whether it's Kevin Rudd's love for Mandarin or for other political reasons, but they were the first to opt out, and then India also showed disinclination towards being seen ostensibly as being a part of any grouping. But this has also got to do with India's foreign policy. A recent policy document which has been released, which has been penned by some of India's major strategic thinkers and policy makers, the Non-Alignment 2.0, it calls for the continuation of strategic autonomy. So whereas on the one hand it would like to be seen as taking some kind of proactive steps against China, but it would not, even now it would not like to be overtly seen as being anti-China or being a part of a grouping which is seen as anti-China. Now we see before the Indian Prime Minister departs for Japan, the Chinese Prime Minister will be coming to India, and I think he has carefully chosen India as his first overseas visit. So this is something, there's a lot of things that are at stake between India and China too. So India may not like to be seen as being overtly China. This has also got to do with trade. India-China trade is expected to touch $100 billion by 2015. And so both the sides realize that the political ties should not hold the economic ties hostage.
The question now.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. My question is that do you think that the Constitution of Japan may restrict the naval cooperation between the two countries? The second question is that I think that in the future the two countries' naval cooperation will be improved, and so in Indian Ocean region and in Western Pacific region, are there some differences of their cooperation in the two regions?
What are the implications for the South China Sea cooperation?
Between India and Japan and the South China Sea?
Yes, because that's another question. Could you give us some insights?
The third question.
Yes, my name is Hao Fan from the Center for International Law. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have two questions. The first question is that in your presentation you recommend that Japan and India should consider conducting joint patrol in the Indian Ocean, right? Could you please further elaborate on that? I mean, what should be the area to conduct the joint patrol? Is this generally in the high sea, or would it be in some maritime zones? Should it be also towards the East China Sea, for example, and what should be the specific form or mechanisms for that kind of trout patrol? You mentioned also the Indo-Combat trout patrol mechanism, right? I would also very much interested to hear further on that, because as far as I know, Indonesia is quite sensitive when it comes to trout patrol. Indonesia has not been very receptive to conduct trout patrol in Malacca Strait, for example. Here in Malacca Strait, they only conducted coordinated patrol with Malaysia and Singapore. So it's very interesting to hear that Indonesia is now conducting trout patrol with India. The second question is that you also mentioned in your presentation that Indian companies are now also working in Vietnam, along the Vietnamese coast for exploration, right? So the question would be, what is the implication for the South China Sea dispute, and what is the implication for the Indian-China relationship in that regard? Thank you.
To answer the first question about the constitution of Japan, of course, yeah, there is a domestic debate going on in Japan whether Japan's constitution should be revised or could be revised. But of course, I see in the near future, in the event of LDP succeeding to remain in power for 4 years, or in the event of Shinzo Abe continuing to remain at the helm of affairs, already we have seen that there are many things that have happened which show that the Japanese Prime Minister is willing to take a stand on some issues. For example, for the first time in Japan's post-war history, they are now celebrating the day when the Allied forces left Japan and Japan regained its independence. So that day was celebrated recently. So we see that a more nationalistic government like the LDP may be prepared to do a rethink on Japan's constitution. Now, of course, when I was in Japan and interviewed academics and people in the government also, there is a debate. I'm not sure how successful it is, but they are aware of the need to revise Japan's post-war constitution. Then cooperation between India and Japan in the Indian Ocean, is there a difference between the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific? Yes, I would think so, because I think the Japan-India cooperation will work more effectively in the Indian Ocean region, because India is a major dominant naval power in the Indian Ocean region, not in the Western Pacific. So this would work, the cooperation between the two countries, in my opinion, would work better in the Indian Ocean region. And India is now acquiring another aircraft carrier, the Admiral Ghosh, which should be in service by the end of this year or early next year. So then India will have two functional carriers in the Indian Ocean region, which means its power projection capabilities are more. And of course, the United States would also not like to see India doing too much in the Western Pacific. Then implications of India-Japan cooperation in the South China Sea region, if that was the case. Yes, of course, India doesn't have any territorial stake in the South China Sea, but time and again, if we see the statements by the Indian Foreign Ministry, we see that India has emphasized the fact that all the disputes in the South China Sea should be settled according to the provisions of the UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So China has not been very willing to do that. So by stressing the fact that all the disputes in the South China Sea should be settled according to the spirits of the UN UNCLOS, and by also stressing the importance of keeping the sea lanes of communication in the region open, I think India has signaled clearly that where its priorities lie in the region. Of course, but as I kept telling earlier, India has no territorial stake in the South China Sea. Then regarding the joint patrolling, I think the joint patrolling would have to be in an area which is infested with piracy. I'm thinking of the Straits of Malacca, for example. Because of course the piracy levels are down there, nothing compared to what is there off the coast of Somalia and other places. But of course there is a incidence of piracy in these areas, and the Straits of Malacca is a very narrow area. So, and this is the area through which the majority of the shipping going on to Japan passes. So coordinated patrolling would have to be held only in the piracy infested area. Otherwise, no country would like to see some other navy coming and engaging in coordinated patrolling in somebody else's territorial waters. And with regards to Indonesia, of course, yes, this is something very interesting. Indonesia is not very willing to do that, but I think we have to remember the fact that the easternmost of in the Indonesian islands, which is Aceh. Banda Aceh is only around 90 nautical miles from the southernmost portion of India, which is the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The southernmost point of India's Andaman and Nicobar Islands is known as the Indira Point. And from there, it's only 90 nautical miles to Banda Aceh. So India and Indonesia are actually closer than we think. And there are lots of issues at stake. For example, India imports natural gas from Indonesia. There are also commercial and other interests involved. So Indonesia, and we have to remember that India and Indonesia have been historically very close also. So all these factors work in the favor of India and Indonesia having coordinated patrols, and also because of India's strength in the anti-piracy operations. Then Indian companies engaging in oil exploration efforts in the coast of Vietnam, of course, but this is a purely commercial venture. Indian companies are investing in oil exploration and oil production all over the world, whether it be in Siberia, whether it be in Angola, whether it be in Niger, in Nigeria, in South Sudan, off the coast of Vietnam. It just happens to be in the South China Sea. But of course, I think this is a commercial venture. The fact that it is in a region which is has been in the news for all the wrong reasons, that of course has an implication, but the Indian government has time and again stressed that this is only a commercial venture by an Indian oil company, which is the oil and natural gas company. But of course, and Vietnam and this is in Vietnamese territorial waters. The problem happens because China says it is in an area which is Chinese territorial waters. So if there is any dispute, the dispute would have to be between Vietnam and China. Indian companies have signed an agreement with Petro Vietnam, which has given India and the ONGC a lease for operating and exploring oil blocks off the coast of Vietnam. And China has raised objections to it, but India and Vietnam have gone ahead with the oil exploration efforts. So I think in the future, if the South China Sea issue, there are further changes on the ground situation, then India will have to see. But as of now, it has gone ahead with the oil exploration efforts in the South China Sea off the coast of Vietnam. But of course, there are many other things happening on the India-Vietnam front. India and Vietnam also, India is offering training to Vietnamese personnel also in maintaining the old Soviet era military hardware, because Vietnam also got a lot of old Soviet era hardware, and India even now has quite a lot of Russian made military hardware. So the cooperation also extends to other areas, not only in this front.
Sorry?
Yes, if my memory serves me right, when the Japanese participated in the anti-terror, during freedom operations, some of those Japanese vessels used to touch base at Indian ports, for R&R, probably amplified R&R. Now, with reference to the destroyers, the Japanese destroyers being deployed off the Gulf of Aden, actually, is there any such thing going on? Are the Japanese vessels calling at Indian ports?
Yes, for refueling, yes, but this is on a case-to-case basis. When I interviewed some officials in the Japanese, in the MOFA, they said it is on a case-to-case basis. So this is where it takes time. So the Japanese government puts a request that kindly allow refueling facilities for this particular vessel which is going there. And sometimes, as we all know, Indian bureaucracy, it takes a long time. So sometimes this may or may not work out. So, but there is no agreement between the two countries for refueling such facility. But this is one of the areas I argue is important. This is why there is a need for a maritime cooperation treaty, because then that can happen on a regular basis. Of course, India would be the very most convenient place to refill, because it is most likely halfway between Japan and Djibouti, if not exactly halfway, somewhere in the middle. So it will be most likely placed, and there are lots of facilities, whether it is on the eastern coast or on the western coast, where Japanese vessels could be refueled. But of course, as of now, it happens on a case-to-case basis.
Any final questions? Rahul? I think no. Okay. Thank you, Rupert. I thought that was very interesting. I thought you were going to be rattling on figures and graphs, sure. But I thought very interesting topic, and so thank you once again. I now have the task of presenting you a token from ISEF, which is actually my own book. So thank you so much, Rupert. And after this, there's tea and coffee outside. Thanks again, Rupert.